Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. This is episode 91.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair. The guys are indulging me this time. Our heroes. I've noticed a lot lately that it's all fairly recent stuff, historically speaking. I want to change that this time here. One of my heroes, somebody I really have read a lot about in recent days, and really think the heck a lot, I think is not known well. The French king, Louis XIV. I truly believe so much of modern Europe, and therefore the world we live in today, we owe a lot to this guy here who reigned for 72 bloody years in France. 72 years, 110 days. And so much of the modern world that we know came from the world he created. And I think that deserves a little bit of fun, a little bit of pushing, a little bit of knowledge, and I don't know, he's fun.
So you're an admirer.
I'm an admirer, yes I am.
And
I'm neutral. I mean, he's French, so I'm kind of predisposed to not like him, I suppose. No offense. Yeah, never mind.
Never mind.
That's okay.
And I'm building a guillotine.
Right, you're building a guillotine.
Really? Yes, and I knew that you were definitely not kind of into this here.
Well, I probably have the broadest egalitarian streak of the three of us. Now, not that the other two here are authoritarians or anything.
Or elitists.
Not at all. Not at all. But I have that good old American egalitarianism really runs through my bones. So talking about kings in a positive way is just difficult for me.
Well, now that's not fair.
That's your Jacobite roots.
Yeah, well, I get that. That's not a problem, you know. But just because he's a king, he shouldn't be.
Right, you had high praise for Elizabeth.
Yeah. But she's a constitutional monarch
with
very limited
that's one of
political power.
That's one of my whole issues, though, is the fact that just because somebody comes from a different time and a different way of looking at things, we should not absolutely dismiss them as bad. And I think Louis is one of those that really fits that.
And we, to be fair, we do often call for understanding things in context.
Absolutely.
Yep, context is king.
So,
oddly enough,
you know, he's still a divine right of king's exemplar who thought his shit didn't stink.
Well, you're quite literal on that because, you know, as you may or may not know that they watched kings defecate at times at this time.
Really?
Well, yeah, because otherwise, how do you know that they're healthy? That's kind of the only thing they had. If you saw the TV series Outlander, in the second season when they go to France, they show that actually. That's his great grandson Louis XV. But they make this big thing together about the king's coming and he's going to go to the potty. They don't say that word. That's my word. And we're going to watch because everybody wants to make sure that And he's constipated. And Jamie Fraser, the Scot. Yes, you know, because if it ain't Scottish, it's crap. He's the one that tells him you really ought to try some porridge. It'll fix that. And he basically says, well, isn't that something that the peasants eat? He says, well, not if you ate it, then it would be what the royal people eat. And he goes, okay, and takes care of business, apparently.
Interesting.
Well, Diana Gabaldon, she's an amazing author. I really love the way she does things. We're kind of getting off on a tangent here, but that's okay because Louis is bloody complicated. He's complicated.
He's an emphasis on the bloody at times.
Sometimes, that's correct.
Yeah,
but they all were at the time.
Character.
That's correct. And I do want to kind of set up. I'm going to talk a little bit about him. I cannot give you his bio in any length of time that we have here. It is too complex. You really need to read some books about him.
At least start with Wikipedia.
Absolutely, it is an excellent place.
But you can give us a couple of highlights of the bio.
I'm going to
that context stuff. You got to frame it.
Now, I will tell you this: the book you need to read on, because there's tons of them out there, is the book by Olivier Bernier. I know it's French. I'm probably butchering that. It's simply Louis.
No, that would be correct.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm going because there's Bernier that was goalie for the Red Wings.
Oh, whatever gets you there. Okay.
French Canadian.
Yeah, French Canadian. Yeah.
He is. It's a very recent biography of him. I read that bad boy cover to cover, ebook version, and I loved it. He also did one on his successor and great grandson, mind you, Louis XV. Because
he outlived both his son and
his grandson. That's correct. And he was, partially because of his long reign, he dominated European politics during his lifetime. But it's not all it was. I don't want to minimize him by saying that. He was born in 1638. This is shortly after Cardinal Richelieu, the Three Musketeers and all that. That's a place we can kind of hang our hat.
It's the middle of the 30 Years' War.
That's exactly right. England and France are definitely going at each other, as well as the whole Europe.
And now this is something I know partially from my reading of some alternative history.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's sort of alternative history, science fiction books, but set during the 30 Years' War. But one of the things that was a big deal was that he came late to his parents.
Yes, he did.
And one of the reasons he's called the Sun King is because it was considered to be a miracle. There are some that believe he's not actually the son of his father.
That is correct, and of course Alexandre Dumas, does a whole lot of that business in there.
Supposedly Mazarin is the father.
That's been said as well.
At least that's one of the theories.
There are several.
Yeah.
The whole Man in the Iron Mask business. If you watch the TV series Versailles, you get some of that. I'll get into that in a minute. That's a great way of making this accessible. But you're exactly right. He was born very late to his parents. And he was the heir, and then comes the spare. His brother Philippe comes shortly after him, the Duc de Orléans, who eventually was the founder of the Orleanist line of kings. 150 years later, it comes through his brother. Both of them are portrayed amazingly well in the Versailles TV series. But he was a little bitty fella when his father dies early, and his minority takes place for like 16 years. He's like 4 when his father dies, 5. And his mother becomes regent. She wasn't supposed to do because, she's Spanish, and we're not really all that trusting of the Spaniards at this point here.
Well, yes, the Spaniards are Habsburgs.
That's right.
At this time. And you know what? That's one we've got to do. We have got to do a history episode about the Habsburgs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
because
correct.
The history of the Habsburgs is the history of Europe for 500 years.
That's correct. Yeah, this is just one brief moment of that. And of course, we've talked about the end of the Habsburgs with World War I. So,
right. And this probably is the beginning of the end of the Habsburgs as the major players.
It is. The War of Spanish Succession, really, they take it on the chin bad. Louis does too. All of Europe, nobody won that. Ultimately Louis lost, but everybody was really in bad shape after that was all over with. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself.
Even though they have this division, they're still united in Catholicism, though.
Oh, yes.
They are. That is, which kind of makes this even worse in many ways. Because,
and it's setting up friction with England.
Correct. Who is Protestant this time.
At the beginning of Protestantism in England.
That's correct.
And Northern
But Richelieu
Germany.
was willing to work with Protestants if it favored the French.
That's correct.
Because Richelieu was nothing but a nationalist. And a patriot, let's put it that way, patriot. Nationalist has other connotations. He was a patriot first and foremost after being a Catholic.
That is correct. And see, that's
even before being Catholic.
One of the lessons Louis didn't learn. He did for a while, but ultimately he became a great Protestant persecutor against the Huguenots much later. Almost to his own detriment, because he just decided he wanted to. It was kind of the other side of where I'm going with all this, is the divine right of kings business has advantages.
Right, so, and he goes against the Peace of Westphalia, because that was part of the settlement, was that you're supposed to let the people choose the religion they're going to follow.
That's correct. That's right. And once he changes over time. Again, 74 years, he was absolutely brilliant at times, and he was absolutely stupid at times. He was one, and I'm glad you mentioned Cardinal Mazarin, because he was the one who helped bring him up in many respects. He was a good man. History was... he is.
History speaks well of him. He was in service to the Pope, Pope Urban VIII, prior to coming to serve France.
And he was...
And Mazarin is not actually his name.
Yeah.
It's Mazzarini. Mazarini is a long line. Matter of fact, Pope Urban VIII, I believe, is his uncle, if I remember this correctly.
Yeah.
And he was very much in the high-ranking power structure of Rome. He was right there at the top. Matter of fact, there is a square in Rome named after the Mazarini family, and it was his property. I only know this because of that book, because there's some historical details. It was really cool when you get there and you realize, oh my God, this book that I read took place right here.
Yeah. Mazarin is an amazing personality. He is truly, I don't want to call him a saint, I won't go that far, but he is brilliant administrator, both politically as well as religiously. He taught Louis well. There was a lot of worry about him because he was not French; he's Italian.
Yes,
and his, of course, Mama was Spanish at this time. So a lot of people felt that they would bring down the Frenchness, as it were, of France at this time.
But he was very astute, and Richelieu took him under his wing. That's how he became.
That's right. He's Richelieu's successor. I don't think we said
successor,
that.
Yes, and he was very smart. I mentioned his name is not Mazarin; it's Mazarini. He changed it to Mazarin to be more French.
Correct. That's right.
It's probably not pronounced Mazarin. It's probably like Mazarine or something like that.
Right.
Pronounced in French, but he did that to fit in, to show that he was trying to be French. And you're right. If there's anything good that Louis does, a lot of that, if not all of it, comes from Mazarin and Anne,
his mother. That is correct.
Because he was definitely a mama's boy.
But there's no question. Of course, father's gone,
yes.
And anybody could have swayed him. That was the intention or the thought and the worry in the country at the time, and it almost happened. And I do think it's important to understand, if you want to understand Louis, and the book by Bernier was very clear about this. Everything that makes him who he is, everything he works on later in life for those long years, comes from what's known as the Fronde. Yes. It's a rebellion that took place when he was still a child. He's reigning. He's in charge. They actually break into his bedroom in Paris at one point and scares both the hell out of him and his mother, and everybody. Almost, had it not been for him being the king, they could have done anything they wanted to him. They almost did, but that was just enough to prevent him from having harm. And he never, ever, ever forgot that after that, and he reigned accordingly because of that, from that fear that he had. And everything he did, the palace at Versailles was built to prevent this sort of thing from ever happening again. The divine right of kings, which his mother pushed on him, was he embraced that because this cannot ever happen again. In many respects, he kind of saw into the future what the French Revolution really could have been like, and ultimately was. It was actually worse. He saw that because of the Fronde, and
mob rule. I mean,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Paris was famous for that, and of course, it's going to boil over for his twice successor, Louis XVI.
Well, that's part of the problem with divine right of kings, because we saw it with the War of the Roses. Just because you control the capital shouldn't mean that you control the country.
That's right.
As we saw recently in this country, briefly occupying and being idiots in the capital it's not really insurrection. It really is a riot, especially when the police kind of let it happen.
Right. It's not something that ultimately, but it scares the hell out of people in power.
It does,
and
it really does.
They are very reactionary usually towards that, and Louis was very much that. And he also recognized too, Louis was all about the glory of France, and that's a nationalistic thing, but it's also the people of France.
Yes, but I think partially that's tied up in his divine right.
It is.
Absolute rule, because the glory of France is his own glory.
That's correct. They're
tied
together.
They're going to be tied together.
Yeah.
This is also, it's not the end, but it's getting close to the end. It's probably, there's probably still another 150 to 200 years of this, but where I've talked about this before, one of the reasons that World War I happened is because that truly is the end of, you go to war because of rulers feel slights against one another.
That's right.
Or because they're grabbing their own personal glory.
He's
still in the middle of
He's
this.
very much in the middle of that, and he does it well. I mean, he does. In fact, that was his policy. is
Yes.
constantly be at war.
Well, if you're not at war, you're preparing for it.
That's exactly
Peace
right.
is preparation for war.
Very much so. And he recognizes that's in the Europe of his day. The only way to ever succeed is to beat your rivals.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about the formation. You've got 30 Years' War, which was literally, by the standards of World War I, it was the First World War, not World War I.
Right.
Because it was literally every country in Europe had a hand in it.
Yeah.
And there were more countries then than there are now,
Right.
At the beginning of World War I, because you have all of the Germany's plural.
Right. And there's alliances going on here.
And they're shifting constantly.
Yeah.
So there's that, plus the
Spain.
mob breaking into his bedroom as a child. All of these things are going to be formative in how the country should be
The
run.
only way to keep the country strong is to keep attacking outward.
Yeah.
Now, we recognize the fallacy of that, but you understand with the weapons that he had at the time, that's a very logical
Well,
way to
that's
do it.
also the position of everybody else, so it kind of has to be your position.
You
too.
don't have much choice on that. So I don't ding him for that. He believed in the divine right of kings, but he would be what Thomas Hobbes would call the enlightened despot. He really, I mean, it's my way because I say so, but he also believes he knows what he's doing. He's not one to just, and that's a difference to me between, say, Henry VIII or Bonaparte, which are on either side of him in historically. They do it because they want to for themselves. Louis may do it for himself, but he's always believing that doing it for myself is automatically doing it for the country, and everybody benefits. He's very important. He's very
Except
tied
for the
into
people
that.
that he kills in the war.
Well, that
I mean, because he's using war as a tool to pacify internal dissent.
Right, but
If I can keep you focused on an outside
That's
enemy,
part of it.
You're not going to be focused on me as the enemy.
No, I don't.
I gotta agree with Martin on this.
There's
one,
some of that, yeah.
Because I think that the driving out of the French because there are almost no Protestants in France, even to this day. It's a very small minority. It's like 93% Catholic. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's somewhere around there is my guess. If I'm wrong, listeners, drop us a line at snakesandotters.com or on our Twitter feed at Snakes and Otters. Let us know, because I rely on you guys for my fact checking and I'm lazy. So, there is some of that, but I would also argue that he's right in the sense that he probably does believe that Francis is right that Louis believes that it is good for the country. Because we're still in a time where rulers believe that the country should have one religion. Nobody really likes the Peace of Westphalia, where while you may be able to have a state religion, you can't force people to follow it.
Right.
And that is brand new in history.
Right.
It is the first stab at religious freedom that we would, or something we would trace to religious freedom.
That we would recognize it as an attempt at
Louis is
religious
still
freedom.
kind of tied up in the whole, well, but if you have internal dissent over religion, you have internal dissent, and back to the Fronde again, we might lose our heads. We might, this is serious business here.
Well, when you're divine right, if you have differing views on religion, totally different religions, that throws into question the divine right.
Yeah, and also something else to remember. This is also during the time of Oliver Cromwell, and Charles I has lost his head over this issue. So those two things together going on in the world around you, Louis is going to do everything he can to keep control, and he was very, very talented in this. He's the first one. In fact, that's what he does. The whole concept of and it's in the TV series very clearly on this. The reason Versailles did not just stay a hunting lodge, because that's what it was. It wasn't. It was
a hell of a hunting lodge.
Well, I mean, the original. If you look at the actual building itself, it was much, much less than when he started. It was his father's hunting lodge that when he ended it, because he spent oodles and oodles of money there, expanded it, and the Hall of Mirrors, all that sort of stuff happened under his watch. Because he figured out, if I can get my aristocrats away from their provinces, they can't cause me trouble.
Right.
And he brings them under his roof, literally in this case, because all patronage comes from him.
Right. It's the one thing that the French kings were never able to do. It's why the French had the English had so many civil wars, is their nobility were constantly plotting against the king.
And Louis sees this.
He's learned this.
Yes, you betcha.
So he's figured out a way to keep the nobility
in line
without letting them plot against him. Because if they're constantly under his roof, they rely on him for everything.
And that to me is brilliance. It's political genius.
All right, so
They're separate. They're separated from their retainers and their
yes,
That is
their
correct.
armed men and all that stuff.
yes, they have less ability to cause trouble in that sense. So let me stop you right there. Okay, so my question. Actually, let's put the question on hold for just a second. This is probably a good point in the episode to bring up bourbon, because really, how can you not talk about bourbon when you're talking? Granted, he's not a. Actually, is this the bourbon?
He is.
Ah, perfect. He's a bourbon king.
That's correct. Yes.
So
House of Bourbon.
yeah,
Yes.
bourbon. Yeah,
Like a bourbon.
yeah. So
You know,
we're
I've been
Americans.
thinking that we need to give this break in each episode some kind of real name.
Oh, that's an excellent idea.
Some kind of. We always just say it's time to stop and talk bourbon, or so we need to give it like a name, like Bourbon Talk or Bourbon Break.
The
or,
House of Bourbon. I'm sorry. It's timely at the
I'll
moment.
be rejecting that one.
That's right.
So Bourbon Break or something alliterative is good.
Excellent idea.
But,
We'll have to think about that.
we have
yes.
to ponder on that. Now, Robert's very creative, and I'm sure he'll come up with something good.
Excellent idea. Excellent idea. So, I'd like to talk about bourbon in the middle of the episode, although we often talk about it during the episode. But, you know, it's our time, listeners, to indulge just a moment of your time to talk about one of our favorite things. Now, none of us are alcoholics. We generally don't drink unless we're together.
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, I'll have an occasional beer in the evening. Occasionally, it's a little bit of bourbon, but I'll either be drinking bourbon with you guys or over at the rectory, because that's usually where I do. Before this is where I did most of my drinking. was at the rectory.
I do like a glass of wine with especially beef. If I'm having some kind of beef meal, if I have the opportunity, I will get a red wine to go with that. Professor Mendel, my friend that has a doctorate in molecular genetics, a friend of ours, so I call him Professor Mendel or Dr. Mendel, recommended Spanish wines to me, and I've tried a Crianza.
Oh, yes, because of his wife.
Yes. So I tried a Crianza, which was good and went really well with my Christmas prime rib that I blogged about on snakesandotters.com. So, but I'm probably the only one of the three of us that'll have like wine with a meal like that, right?
Yeah, I'm not really big
You're
on
not a big
wine. When I do have wine, I prefer it sweet.
Yeah.
Not real big on the dry wines. I like the
Yeah. Now I try. I'm not a big Cabernet, so I usually stay away from Cabernet.
My wife has gotten into the last 8 or 10 years through our friends that we met at church. Oh shoot, what is it? It's a little bit bubbly, but it's not champagne. It's not even called a sparkling wine.
Probably like a Moscato.
Moscato, that's it. It's a Moscato.
Yeah, that's sweet dessert wine type thing. Yeah.
A peach Moscato I really like.
Really?
Yeah. Now, it's not going to be my first call, but, you know, I like that. But this is bourbon.
It's bourbon.
time.
Yes, here I am.
It's bourbon time.
Bourbon talk.
So, I have finished my double oaked Woodford Reserve. Finally, have to get a new bottle, and I moved on to the Four Roses. Although that's still got a fair amount there.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent bottle. This is the Four Roses, not the small batch, which I think I'm going to try and get the next time, just to see how much of a difference there really is. But for your basic bottle, it's not your screw top bourbon, so it's a little bit higher end than like your early times. It's not. I wouldn't even call this a mixing bourbon. I think it's better than that.
Oh yeah,
Because it really is good. I like it with a little bit of ice. I know you gentlemen like yours generally neat.
We're doing neat today.
Yeah. Neat.
But I like the chill in mine. It's just a good, solid bourbon, especially for the price. This is so economical. If nothing else, this is a great starter bourbon because you get started on good bourbon at a decent price.
Yep. And you won't go to garbage bourbon.
Sorry. But even bad bourbon is still bourbon.
Yes.
So what do you got? So, and you also have that, right?
Yes, I have the good Four Roses. I'm getting a nice nose of it here, getting a nice snort.
Yes, as they would say with wines, has a good bouquet. I like that aroma that it has.
But Francis, what did you?
Oh, the maple. I'm still sticking with the maple.
Still on the breakfast bourbon.
Yeah, exactly.
Another
the
time.
Knob Creek maple flavor. I like it.
Yeah, because
Always
we
have.
have returned here again to Studio R.
Yes, and
the atrium.
I'm going to keep riding that particular horse until I drink it dry. Because sooner or later it's going to happen.
Yes, especially if I let you.
Well, that's great. Well, hey, feel free. Feel free to drink it all. But
I am more than willing to share my bourbon. I have partook of others' bourbon often enough to not be jealous of
We try to make sure we have a variety in
Yes.
in each of our studios, so that way we can constantly.
Yes. The only bad thing is when we all do a different bourbon, is that then we have multiple bottles that we have. It takes forever to get.
It takes
through.
forever to finish. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I mean,
I'm not seeing the problem actually.
well, no, but I mean, I don't know if it's more monotonous to say we're still working on these
Well,
three
that's
bottles,
true.
or we're still working on this one bottle. Because it took you how long to get through the Larceny bottle?
Quite a while.
Yeah,
Quite a while.
But that's when we were doing remote recording too.
right. We couldn't share.
We couldn't share.
That's
share.
right. Yeah, and we can always keep buying more and just lengthen the number of bottles on the shelves.
That's true. I would that we had the bourbon collection that my former pastor has.
I have seen it and partaken of it. It is impressive.
Very
Yes,
impressive.
yes.
Yes, he even has the occasional bottle of Pappy's. But although I think he's often he has been given those by very
Yes,
grateful
in fact,
parishioners.
he told me that. Yes, the last time I had some of that, he told me that very thing. So
Yes.
I was happy. For
So I have a
Robert
question.
yes,
I have
Robert has a question he needs
So-
to pose.
So we've been talking about Louis and the circumstances of and some of the events. It's really sounding a little bit like a history episode, though.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to
why
turn
is
this
he a
around.
hero? Yes, correct.
Yes, even
Yes.
though you're technically the captain, I think you've kind of let us slide off into the historical part. So I want
I
to
knew
ask
that
you-
was going to happen. Yes.
Yes,
That's
and,
okay.
and
And
that's
it
and that's
was-
fine because it gives us context.
It's context. It was needed, but I'm at the same point you are.
Let's move.
I'm ready to talk the why. What's the
Why is he?
for Francis?
Because you're talking about him as a hero.
I am.
So, as opposed to someone like a Nietzsche that we needed to know about, you need to
Yes.
need to be familiar with him and his philosophy.
Yes.
So, why is Louis XIV a hero or somebody to look up to? Maybe
And
hero's too strong. I
Keep
don't
in
know.
mind, you're convincing the two of us, and like I said,
I'm mostly indifferent.
I'm ready to build a guillotine.
I understand that.
So you've
That's
got to
right.
convince me that he's worthy
I'm
of
going
your
to
admiration.
steal from the movie Waterloo, which we watched together, actually. Sergio Bonaducek from 1971, which can never be made again. He used 50,000 Russian extras to film the thing. It was beautifully and brilliantly done. But there's a moment in there where Rod Steiger, who plays Napoleon, is sitting before the battle and saying, okay, what are people going to say about me when I'm gone? And his aide, who is standing there with him, a young Viscount, actually, whose name I really can't pronounce, he says, because you extended the limits of glory. And Napoleon goes, meh. But there's some truth to the fact, the reason I love Louis XIV is he is efficient. He is brilliant. He works for the common good, ultimately. That's always in his
At least
mind.
he believes that's what
He
he's
believes
doing.
that. That's correct.
He
There's
did
a belief.
reform the finances of the nation and was able to, I think, if I remember reading this right, he remitted some taxation. and
Correct. Absolutely. Well,
equalized taxation.
Colbert
all that.
was his minister of finance. He doesn't get near enough credit for doing that, but Louis allowed it. Louis was a great leader, and that's why I love him. Is because he understood to pick the right people. He understood the forces that were allayed against him. He recognized that we have a goal that we need to achieve, and that is for the greater glory, in his case, the greater glory of France. And he was able to successfully meet his goals
And
most of the time.
He viewed the glory of France as his own as well.
Well, the fact that the two are inextricably linked, to
Yeah,
me,
I am the state.
That's right. He didn't say that, by the way. He's said to have said that, but he didn't. But that's his philosophy. That's correct. But that's irrelevant. Essentially, he's doing what he believes is right for the good of his country. We can cover it with his language or our language. It doesn't really matter. And
He took seriously the responsibility
of
that
being,
goes
of
with
being the king.
being
of being,
monarch.
That's exactly right. That's why I love him.
And I would say that if anybody in this story, as you know, we all love our stories.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody in the story is the most admirable, it's Mazarin.
Oh, I don't want to
He's
diminish
the guy.
that.
See, that's to me. I'll give Louis credit for not viewing being king as just his own personal hog wallow
Well, that's correct.
Right.
There's Henry
He's
VIII.
no Henry VIII.
to roll
That's
around
exactly it. He does not do what he does out of selfishness, as a general rule, because he believes, since he and the state are linked in his mind, by doing things.
Well, it may sometimes may be selfish, but it's
well,
not,
the actions might be, but the intention.
It's not the same thing as a Henry.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
right.
I want what I want, and trust me, nobody told the king no. You kind of know that, and he was a horn dog. There's no way we didn't really talk about that.
Yeah.
He had mistresses after mistresses after mistresses, 2 wives.
He's French.
That whole stereotype kind of comes from him, believe it or not. It really does.
Yeah,
And-
I mean, I'm willing to give credit for not viewing France as his own personal hog wallow.
correct.
But it does strike me that the guy you really should be celebrating then is Mazarin.
Oh, I have no problem with that either. I think he very much deserves that.
And oddly enough, Richelieu. Richelieu is seen as one of the great villains of history. I do not think he is.
No, thank you, Damas. I mean, he's a convenient one for him.
I think Richelieu is a great patriot, as Americans would understand that.
All right.
Richelieu trained Mazarin. Mazarin is his handpicked successor. And between the two, because Richelieu would have had some formation with the king, but mostly it's Mazarin. But Mazarin, I think, is the one, especially with his mother, they are the ones, I think, set him up to how to view what a king should be.
And that's great. And yet, Louis deserves credit because he didn't repudiate that.
Right.
He could have.
No, I will grant you that.
Yeah, because
Henry
Henry VIII is a great
very
example.
Catholic way of looking at being king.
And he was not afraid to use the auspices of the church to better France. He did that. He would not cross the church. He recognizes he needed the church. That's something Henry never understood. Louis he's ultimate power, and yet he reigns wisely. He doesn't use it as his hog wallow. He doesn't drain the trough dry. The wars he fights glorify France. They don't leave it a burned out shell of itself. But that's the system he worked with, and he's innovative in many ways. Versailles itself was brilliant because he had to end feudalism. Still very, very powerful in France at this time. And by centralization of what he's done, that's the only way to do it.
He truly did create a national government.
Correct.
Which, in a way that I think we would recognize
that's
today.
visionary for the time,
Yeah,
folks.
that's kind of the first time in France, really.
Yes.
I mean, in England, there's
Nobody else has done
been
that.
a little bit ahead of that, a little bit.
Well, they've got the
bit.
whole protectorate thing going on here.
You know.
Right, but I mean, they've had a strong parliament.
That's correct.
It waxed and waned, but they had a parliament that was
France
real.
did too, but Louis pretty much made them irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right,
partially because they were the ones behind the Fronde. So, yeah, he's going to cut them off at the knees.
Well, he also ended, at least temporarily, by everything being centralized in Versailles, the mob in Paris.
Totally neutralized that. That's
Right.
correct.
Now, of course, by the time we get to Louis XVI, that's no longer.
That's all changed.
But
right.
France was always a more fragmentary state than Britain after the time of William the Conqueror, basically. I mean, William the Conqueror makes Britain a fairly unitary state.
He does. The northern versus southern tensions, the whole Mercia versus Wessex and East Anglia and all that kind of goes away.
There's
by the point of the sword,
a consistency of
we're
law
all English.
And administration across England and Wales.
Law and administration is exactly what it
But
is.
France is always a much more... And then, of course, this is why you have somebody like Henry V can make progress and take over parts of France because it is much more fragmentary. The king is much less powerful, and he does change that
at that time. He does. Yeah, Louis changes
he does
that completely.
change that.
He makes France a unit, and it was before on paper, but it really is now.
Exactly. On paper, but in reality, it's very much a collection of dukedoms.
Yeah.
That
I will give the French credit for this. And I think this is very important. Because this is still, I think, when France was, not something that, as Americans would like to mock. It's a hobby, which probably is we should not be that way because France has been a staunch ally in many ways.
That's correct.
But at this point, we have to remember how France comes about. France is the successful half of the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because we have to remember
Frankish.
we have to remember that Charlemagne divided his empire, because France was originally the western half of the Holy Roman Empire. It was the Franks before that.
Yep.
And unlike Germany, the Germanies that very quickly devolved into all of those principalities.
Yeah, they fragmented very quickly.
And they stayed fragmented. Even with the Habsburgs, when they were ruling, they were not even always the ruler, because there were gaps when, because again, you had to be elected. Somehow, the French maintained a national unity as the French. And maybe it's because the Franks were had more history as a people. I don't know.
There's some of that. But be honest, the conflict with England galvanized them through some times where they perhaps could have fragmented further.
Right, and I think
the Bretons and the Normans had their own thing
Burgundy,
for a while. Yeah,
Burgundians. All of the English coming down and taking the coastal
Aquitaine, Anjou, all those things. Eventually, that's brought together into its own thing as unifyingly French.
Right.
And that's, Louis is part of the reason there was never a non-France after this. That was never an issue after Louis.
Yes.
That's he made them extended the limits of glory. Yeah, I kind of like that.
And, to be fair, and again, that's part of our job here. Well, it's not really part of our job. It's just things that we feel we have to point out. Sometimes wrongly at the expense of others.
You betcha. Yeah, Louis made plenty of mistakes. The religious persecution against the Huguenots, history has not looked kindly on him for that, nor should he have, especially considering the fact that it was kind of stupid. Louis should have known better. He was a political animal, par excellence, to use the French, and he should have realized this cannot end well. This cannot end well here. Part of it, I think, was that fear inside him of the Fronde, that if these are traitors in my midst, I can never trust them, and I'm not sleeping easy while they're here. I think that was his motivating factor. He let his own fear dictate something that all of his advisors were clearly saying, "Don't do this.
There's no need.
There's no need. It's bad policy." His brother, the Duc d'Orléans, was very clear about it.
And if anything, if they were truly a threat, he would be most likely to side with them. Because they would be, it would be a power base for him to build around.
His brother wasn't like that.
Right, but I'm saying if that were
traditionally speaking, anybody else.
Yeah, the Duke of Orleans. Traditionally, like Gaston for Louis XIII.
Yeah,
that was very much a real thing. He would have seized upon the Huguenots, and meanwhile, with the Huguenots,
that's right. Yeah,
he would have seized upon that.
Philippe is his own character. He is played amazingly well by Alexander Vlahos. I cannot pronounce his name. Vlahos. In the TV series Versailles, and he gets his own due there. These brothers loved each other and were very close. They called him Monsieur. Was the title he gave, and
that is very unusual in royal families.
That's correct.
Again, that's probably Anne and Mazarin's influence.
That's correct, because the brothers really, and it comes out in the TV series very well. It's very well written, very historically accurate most of the time. They loved each other, and he would back his brother to the hilt, and they were sometimes, in many respects, because they both lived through the Fronde together, they recognized, we only got each other. In the end, we're the only ones watching out for each other. Louis afforded Philippe a great deal of latitude, and he could do whatever he wanted. And part of that was part of the problem, is because even if he can do what he wanted, now what do you do? He didn't have much. He didn't really have any say to speak of, but he was a close advisor to his brother. I think that is, if you want to humanize Louis, that relationship with his brother is probably the best way. They were really pretty amazing to do that. Because you're right, because normally he should have been the one disaffected that anybody that wants to overthrow the king is going to go to. Philippe would never have any of that.
Right.
There were other nobles that tried that on several occasions, and they, of course, met with doom and gloom very quickly. Louis was nothing if not ruthless when it came to, once treachery was uncovered, he had no mercy. That's his background.
Well, yeah, that's the way people ruled at the time. That's not anything unusual. I mean, I can't fault him for that in context at the time. I can fault him for it because mercy generally is better when you're talking about things, but I recognize politically that's not always the way it's going to go. So he's a good leader, you said. Mm-hmm. What were the other? Because we kind of got into a bunch of stuff.
Well, I mean,
because we're having a hard time with. I mean, most of the guys that people we've picked, it's easy to understand. And for this one,
even if we view them as heroes, not because of personal behavior or good character, but because of fun and great at their craft and things like that.
Right.
That's part of that. It's the leadership craft that really...
okay.
That's it. And he had a vision. Right or wrong.
One man with a vision.
That's right. Can do this. Because we really did need to do that. Vision. I think his vision and his ability to execute that vision essentially as he intended. He set his goals. He met his goals. Whether the goals were worthy or not, I mean, that's they were a product of the time.
I guess where, and probably Martin would agree with this. I guess where it's difficult for me. I mean, I have no problem seeing where he was admirable.
Yeah.
In a sense where he did well for his country. But the way you're talking about what is good, why it's almost a dangerous way of talking about it, because being able to meet your goals and being efficient at it is not necessarily good, because I don't want to use the obviously the worst example, but the Nazis were pretty damn efficient.
Yeah, I would say Himmler was efficient at meeting his goals.
Yeah, but he's not worthy of...
Zyklon B is pretty efficient.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that, his belief in what he was doing being right for his goal, which is not a bad goal for the glory of your country.
Everybody always thinks their goals are right.
Well, I understand that. You know that.
Nobody ever gets up thinking, I think I'm going to be evil today.
Yeah, I mean, shoveling 6 million Jews into the ovens, Hitler thought that was for the good of Germany.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't...
And again, that's an extreme example. We're not saying Louis is that level of...
We're not attempting to make...
We're just pointing out that
the extreme
efficiency and
example
vision and meeting it are not necessarily...
Yeah. That's the easy ones to grab hold of.
Yeah.
So, but...
Well, there's no question...
I guess what we're pushing for is something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe...
Eternal questions?
I mean, because...
maybe.
Yeah, because, again, we talked about this. He, at least for his first marriage, he's a huge horn dog, completely adulterous. So that's not something that we would admire.
No.
What did you say? Was like 12 mistresses or something like that?
Well, that's correct. Well, if you... I do
19 children by 12 women outside of marriage. I mean, he settled down on the second marriage and seemed to be faithful.
My God, he was just tired. That's all.
That's correct. Well, I will tell you a really good book on that very subject, The Love and Louis XIV and Women in the Life of the Sun King by Antonia Fraser from 2006.
Yeah.
She's a very, very great author. She examines that of him in depth. Some of this is inevitable based on the worldview he had and the situation in which he was. He could, therefore he did. And that's not necessarily, it's not an admirable thing by any means. That's just an explanatory means.
It makes him no different than any other monarch of the day.
That's right.
But the possible exception of, although he's dead by this point, the monarch in Sweden that is takes part of the early wars of... early part of the wars in the 30 Years' War, he was apparently devoted to his wife. He actually wrote hymns. He was a Lutheran.
Yeah.
But
there were a few of those out there. That's right.
Well, but the preponderance were horn dogs.
Right. Well, Charles I, believe it or not, was supposedly faithful to his wife. Of course, he lost his head.
Yeah.
Charles II, of course.
And Henrietta was not exactly one most would think you would be faithful to. History does not speak well of her either.
No, not at all. And it's, hey, things happen. There are love matches. Well, George III is a great example, too. I mean, he and Queen Charlotte, they had like 13 kids, and they were very devoted to each other. So it does happen.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Whereas Henry VIII, well, we kind of know the whole business about that sort of stuff. But I recognize that Louis is very flawed individual. But his great reign and his bringing his country...
What's great? I guess I don't mean to push so hard on this, but and maybe this is just my failing in this, but I'm just looking for something bigger than he met his vision.
He unified France.
That's it.
And
he made her a power to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Wasn't she already a power to be
Not
reckoned
really.
with?
No, I mean, it was a much more fractional
That's
kingdom
correct.
than before him.
That's correct, and maybe that's it. Is he made when I kind of flippantly used the word "you extended the limits of glory" earlier? That's really what I'm talking about. He made his country a force to be reckoned with on the continent and continental affairs, and that's something I think is admirable. France was no longer this backwater that it had been at times. I mean, England dominated her during the Wars of the Roses and during the 100 Years' Wars and all this stuff because of that fractionalization. England already had that kind of down because of the Norman conquest. The Germanys, we've talked about the fact that they were completely ununified. Louis unified France, and that's a good thing.
But is that enough to hang your hat on for the high standards of Snakes and Otters heroes?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. I think that is a great.
I understand here that you're analyzing the history, and you're looking at someone who had an impact on history, and describing that impact in a positive way. But you're not really giving me a reason to tear down the guillotine.
Well, that's entirely up to you.
I mean, to me,
Yeah, I'm not building. I'm not helping you build it, but I guess I'm. This has got to be a first, though. This is the first of our heroes where we've not all agreed.
This is true. That's exactly right.
Which I think is fascinating. This is in many ways, this is a much better episode for it.
And I would come, again as a proponent of the American idea of revolution and nation building,
and
I would come to eventually condemn the guillotine.
Yes.
I don't make a mistake here. I'm not applauding what would eventually happen in France.
No, no.
With the Directory and all that, and talk about some complicated French history. The post French Revolution era is a huge mess.
Yeah.
And a complete disaster because it's fueled by revenge. And
it's
never
revenge.
All the things that Washington stamped out of our revolution, they let run wild.
Yes. Well, it never goes away until the end of World War II in many respects.
Yeah. So, but in this case, I mean, I'm kind of with them when it comes to chopping kings' heads off.
Yeah. See, and I think
I don't think he's worthy of having his head chopped off. Now, I'll grant you, it's probably easier as a Catholic to say he wasn't so bad.
You have a forgiving streak, yes. Okay.
But also,
but absolution.
French is a Catholic country.
Well, and he was very Catholic. That's correct.
Absolution and redemption are built into your worldview.
Yes.
They're built into your genes. I have to try to find another resource for that, but I need to add that to my worldview. I need to be that Washingtonian. We've all suffered in service.
Let's put it this way. So we look for great leaders. Anybody can, well, not anybody, but it's one thing to make your country strong.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to do great things with your country.
Mm-hmm.
To advance the cause of the human condition.
Yes.
But in the time that he lived, is that even possible?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm saying is judging him by our standards, you'll never get him to be a hero. But judging him by the times that he was at, why wouldn't you?
Well,
but
I think
if you judge any king by that the standard of their time, then anybody that didn't end up the way Charles I did, you're probably going to have some admiration for.
Oh well, some.
But
there's plenty of douchebags.
I don't think it's wrong to then judge these elements of history by the high standards of Snakes and Otters.
Well, these two are not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not. But yeah, to your point, just because it happened 300 years ago doesn't mean that what was heroic now or what was heroic then should still be heroic now, and vice versa.
Character is ageless.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, but Louis is complicated.
Well, we're all complicated.
Trevor Slattery,
See, and that's kind of why I like him, is because he is complicated. He was a great sinner, but he was amazingly powerful and efficient at what he did. He did not drink the trough dry. He did not, that to me.
There's some redemptive elements.
Absolutely,
to his
for
life.
the fact that
what
he
is
had
a
that
counterpoint to all of the illegitimate children? What's a counterpoint to the driving out the Huguenot population, to the persecution,
the unification of France, the making it able. His people benefited under him tremendously.
He did. Like I said, if I read it right, he evened out the tax burden a little bit.
That's correct.
That is very commendable, especially for the day.
The tax system at the time
he restrained the aristocracy.
Yes.
Because
they benefited from the tax situation. They were not the ones paying; they were the ones benefiting.
For the benefit of the people.
Yeah, he made them start paying up.
That's exactly right. See. But then again, we're also judging him based on our modern day ideals, and I don't think that's fair. I really don't. And that's the historian in me. I know that.
I know. I'm struggling too because we always talk about context,
and maybe that's the point.
And we always talk about judging these people in context, but at the same time, we're all about eternal questions and
we're not excusing.
Character is ageless.
Yeah.
Right. What's true now is true then. What's true then is true now. Yeah. What is good?
Why is he not a bully? Because he could have been, but he wasn't. Except on occasion, when to be honest, he usually
so his restraint is admirable.
Oh yeah.
Now I will grant you that.
That's right.
For the day and the view of what it meant to be a monarch by pretty much every monarch of the day.
That's right.
Any amount of restraint of not being Henry VIII is somewhat admirable.
Yeah. That's right.
Because he is the poster boy for selfish Dick King.
Correct. In the worst sense of that.
Yeah.
Correct. And Louis is not
King
that.
England.
Louis is not that. I mean, he is. I mean, yeah. Not to say
he's the horn dog. But
but
he apparently, though, I will say this: he took care of his illegitimate children. He legitimized a good number of them.
Against the ways of the times too. He
yes.
expended a great amount of political capital to do that.
So I will give him props for that because that is unexpected.
Well, see, family mattered to him, and France mattered to him, and I get that.
Okay, I mean there are worse things you could write on the tombstone than France mattered and family mattered. So
I'd like to think
I'll give him a little something there.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
extended the limits of glory.
I mean, ruling for 72 years and 110 days, you're going to F something up. Mm-hmm. You're going to make some bad decisions.
He did. Yeah, that's right. But he made a lot better
But you're also going to make some good decisions because otherwise somebody would have built the guillotine before you got to 72
The Fronde would have happened again.
Yeah. So, maybe our difficulty is also a lack of knowledge in the area. Because obviously France is far better read on Louis than we are.
Yeah, I think it's worth your time, gentlemen. I think you will... If you can restrain your Republican tendencies a little bit, and think of him with the medieval mindset, because he's
bloody un-American.
Well, that's the point. Not everything has to be, and certainly you can't judge him that way. You're talking about this is Renaissance times.
Well, this would be
1643 to 1715.
That's
post-Renaissance, exactly. So you're
in the Baroque period.
Yes, and as we all know, if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Yes, that's great. Knew that.
I feel like I should end this episode by singing the Star Spangled Banner or something here.
Oh, we have spent so much time on...
such a francophone here.
Actually, I'm more of an anglophone than a francophone, and you all kind
of
know
this particular incident, episode, we are francophone.
And the intention of that is to recognize that, and it was kind of personally for me, I can tell you the kings of England themselves by memory very, very clearly. You all know this. My bookshelf has books on each one of them. And I'm recognizing by doing that, they're dealing with France all that time. And I knew more about the French monarchy than I realized. Yeah. And I'm thinking, we ignore that at our peril. And I think that's kind of the American attitude is if it's England, we'll embrace it. If it's France, they didn't like them, so we don't like them. That's not
Which
right.
is very ironic because
Very ironic.
for the first 100 years, it would have been the other way around.
Yeah.
That's correct. We were, if you want to talk about America and France, we should love them. We really should. Because we
Without the
wouldn't.
French,
we
we would still be British.
We owe them a lot.
We
Yeah.
owe
Now, hey, we've paid a lot back, and that's the way it's to
Absolutely.
be. It's the way it's
We've
supposed to
saved
be.
them twice from the Huns.
That's correct,
Yes.
and that's not a bad thing.
Yes.
About
So I think that entitles us to
A little judgment.
a little cheese eating surrender monkey.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, but they were not always such.
No, there
Louis
was a
is
time.
Louis was one of those moments where they were
you know,
badasses.
France has a great history, especially prior to the Revolution, prior to the circumstances getting so bad with Louis XVI. As I said once before, it may have been during show prep. They're called the elder daughter of the church, meaning they're the first non-Italian property, lands that really embraced the faith, and they never lost it.
That's correct.
It's it's not like the Germanys. Where it took a long time to bring Christianity there.
Even through anti-clerical movements, which were very strong post-revolution.
Again, yes, post-revolution.
Post-revolution, they did see themselves very anti-clerical, especially through some segments of the military, but they do still view themselves as a Catholic nation.
They do, and that anti-clericalism was in large part because the kings used the clergy as the clerks of government. That's where cleric comes from. As a clerk. And when you look at the role France played prior to the early 1490s, being that bulwark against the Muslims coming up through Spain, they, along with the Austrians, prevented the invasion and conquering of Europe by Muslim armies. And that's often forgotten.
And France did give us Voltaire.
Yes.
Who began to then he was anti-clerical, but he understood too that the church and the state could be separate and both flourish.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the Voltaire idea.
Culturally, France has given us so much, so very much. That is very true.
Not as much as Scotland.
Well, France and Scotland have enjoyed a extremely close relationship.
It's called the Old Alliance.
That's correct. Because hey, they both hate the English. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as we know.
Yes.
Yes. And so you go away, English, or I'll taunt you a second time.
That's. I was wondering if we were going to do that. You notice I did not do this episode in a French accent.
It's outrageous. You have an outrageous French
I
accent.
could have done that, but I did not. No.
Yeah, well, I gotta say, we probably would have stopped you real fast. on
Yes,
that
you would
one.
have stomped on me.
Yes.
It's only a flesh wound, gentlemen.
Yes. So, I think we
so.
covered.
We're right at.
I think we have
at a
more
good
work
mark.
to do because I would like to understand this better. I sort of get where Francis is coming from, but I haven't fully bought into it.
And my feeling in here is that some of the accomplishments that he's attributing to Louis really belong to Mazarin.
Early on, but he had to continue them.
Yeah, it's continuing.
Well, I mean, Mazarin could implement no policies.
He could propose, but he could not.
Well,
dispose.
he was an advisor and a teacher, and that's a good
but
thing.
a very influential.
very,
one.
very influential.
Oh, no question, that's
Yes.
correct.
Because
But
unlike in
ultimately-
England, where the ones that are helping you rule until you become of age, these guys didn't get killed.
No, exactly.
So
They
it was
were-
not as dangerous to be a regent.
Yeah, I mean it's Mazarin's view of unifying France as a nation,
Which is part of his
That
Catholicism.
becomes Louis' view as well.
Well, that's correct. That's exactly right. But ultimately, Louis is the one that gets the credit because Louis is the one that did it.
Well, yes, most definitely. So, Francis, what's next?
We are going to the dawn of the third age of mankind. Ooh. Pop culture, folks. Babylon 5. I don't know why it's taken us so long to get there. I'm a huge fan. Robert's a huge fan. Martin, not so much.
Didn't watch it.
Yeah, well, you're going to learn a lot. We record this shortly after the death of Mira Furlan.
Yes, very
and
sad.
Very,
Yes.
very sad. 65 years of age and far too early. She was a wonderful actress, and that kind of prompted us thinking.
Phenomenal woman.
And she's not the only one from Babylon 5.
No, I think we have more dead than alive.
That's correct, and that's a terrible thing, of course. And the more we thought about this, why haven't we done one? Yes. Well, we're going to fix that next episode. We're going to talk about the genius of Babylon 5, what modern television owes to it, because it owes almost everything, folks. We'll go into more of that, though. And it's just, if you don't know it, you should. It's one of the greatest television sagas ever done. Don't miss it.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.